So without further ado, I was actually going to talk about what is anti-corruption collective action and give you a little bit of a brief definition. But as we're running a bit short of time and Greta likes to keep everything exciting, I'm actually going to skip that bit for the moment and maybe come back to it later in the day. But I'd just really like to introduce my panel. We're talking today about the importance of government engagement and support for collective action. As you know, we're talking about mainstreaming collective action and developing it into a norm, having it taken up by governments, the private sector, and promoted by civil society. Having government support and engage and facilitate collective action is still relatively new or undeveloped, but there are interesting examples from around the world, and I'm very pleased to be able to welcome on my immediate left Izadora Zubek, who's the International Affairs Officer at the Anti-Corruption Agency in France. I'm also very pleased to welcome Jorge Bermúdez Soto, who is the Comptroller General from Chile, from the Supreme Audit Institution. And on the far side of the panel, Mr. Navin Beekarry, who is the Director General of the Independent Commission Against Corruption in Mauritius. So we have a wide geographical spread today, and we have some very diverse examples of how government institutions are working to promote and facilitate anti-corruption collective action. And so each are going to do a short presentation on how their organizations are doing this, and then we'll have some questions and a bit of a discussion. So I'm going to ask Navin to kick us off. And I believe you have a few slides, which we, just three, that's great. We don't want death by PowerPoint in our conference, which is something that we're trying to avoid, but 3 slides, hopefully they'll come up. And so the floor is yours.
Thank you, Gemma. First of all, I want to thank the Basel Institute of Governance for the invitation. It's an honor for me to be here. Greta, Gemma, and all the supporting staff have been very helpful since I arrived here. I'm not going to be too long because we have a session of questions and answers where I can pick up on issues that I've not been able to complete. The ICAC was set up in 2002. And when we started, we were really inspired by the Hong Kong ICAC at that particular point in time. And I remember we had a famous motto or message where we said that the ICAC and you, the perfect partner. The word you is important in that particular message because it means you in each and every corner that you happen to find yourself. So in fact, when you take that message, the perfect partner, that is really the same kind of rationale that underpins the whole topic of collective action. So you means women's group, it means youth clubs, it means university, academia, private sector, in every corner of your life. So, yeah. Which one? Okay. Yeah, so that's where we started in 2002, but it was difficult at that point in time because the rationale at that particular point in time was that once government has set up an agency to combat corruption, that agency would be responsible to do everything. And it was not the responsibility of anybody else. It was the responsibility of that particular agency. But that thinking has evolved, and we are now in a situation where we have been able to move that particular message forward in more concrete terms and build collective action based on this partnership approach, bringing together the different sectors. So I'll go back a little bit to just say a few words about government engagement in combating corruption. I think everybody knows that government is important to enact legislation, and this is what they do. Secondly, they set up institutions. And third, in some countries, like in Mauritius, they do actually actively participate in some anti-corruption events and activities. for example, trying to support the initiative to build dialogue and conversation in combating corruption and building integrity within the private sector. Government supported that project at some point in time. Designated integrity officers in all the ministries and government departments, and those integrity officers would be responsible to work with the ICAC to carry forward the integrity message or the anti-corruption message. And so we have, in a manner of speaking, government support in different forms, and not necessarily as a policy agent or a legislative agent in the form of enacting legislation, but also supporting and getting engaged in specific anti-corruption action. But then once the legislation has been adopted, the ICAC was set up to implement that mandate. And this is where the IC came up with this platform built on partnership. And the ICAC has three main functions. It investigates and prosecutes corruption and money laundering offenses, and then it carries out a lot of educational activities, sensitization and awareness campaign. And thirdly, it does a lot of prevention work. Prevention in this particular context, it means simply systems enhancement. In other words, building up your system. And in recent years, there has been quite a shift in the manner in which the different component of this three-pronged approach has been appreciated. And we have seen recently, and this is true in the ICAC as well, that a lot of importance, even more importance, is being given to education and prevention. Not to say that we're going to neglect or we have to neglect investigation and prosecution, but I think the value added of prevention and education is what's going to be the game changer. If you want change, if you want to build systems and integrity in the systems, prevention and education is important. So this is this public-private partnership approach. And interestingly enough, it has even moved up to building this kind of relationship within the criminal investigation and prosecution system today. I'm going to talk about it later. Thank you. So very briefly, these are the provisions of the legislation which enable the ICAC to carry out these activities. So we have a legal foundation, a legal basis upon which we build every activity, every strategy, every event that we organize in trying to develop collective action in combating corruption. Basically, this is what we have done, and this reflects the collective action, which is basically public-private partnership. We have targeted and worked with the public sector, the private sector, the NGOs, the youth association, religious bodies, women's association, trade unions. So we have developed over the years a strong conversation with those agencies. Why religious bodies? Because depending on the country where you find yourself, and in many countries this is the case, religious bodies play an important part in value setting and building integrity into systems. So the support of the religious bodies in multicultural and ethnic societies is critical. So this is, the picture really gives you, excuse me, and I tried to do this picture to avoid wasting time because Gemma gave me too little time. So, I mean, the picture is self-explanatory, and I don't need to go too much in too much detail. So this is what we are doing about building public-private platform. In 2013, we set up this public-private platform against corruption. It's a consultative platform to sustain and promote constructive interaction among stakeholders from the public and the private sector, and you have an indication of the different types of functions and activities that we carry on, trying to build synergy in that relationship. And this has worked over the years. I think later we're going to have a question on how this has evolved, but I can say that this is a very strong indication of the evolution of strategies to combat corruption. When I started in 2002 setting up the ICAC, the private sector didn't want to hear anything about combating corruption, not a word. In fact, I became the ME #1 for the private sector because I was investigating into a major $1 billion money laundering scam in the #1 commercial bank. But I'm glad to see when I got back to Mauritius 13 years after that the situation has changed, the environment has evolved positively, and we are now like not friends, but we work together. And we have been able to develop this dialogue and this conversation, which is really good. I mean, it takes time. And I think somebody mentioned this morning that in combating corruption, you shouldn't have short-term expectation. It's a long, protracted, strategy and work that you have to do. So this is basically what we have been able to do. We built ethics, code of conduct. We identified together in that platform. It meets regularly, specific issues that are of common concern in trying to build systems. And I think it has worked well so far. It's not perfect, but I think combating corruption is an evolving thing, and you need to count your gains. But I think it's a very positive, indication that the private sector and the industry is committed to play the game, to be part of the process. And the two last bullets, I think everybody knows that, excuse me, for those who thought that corruption was no longer a problem, that it had been addressed, I think COVID-19 gave us a clear indication that it is still well alive and there. And because we have seen in different countries how much money has been siphoned on the basis of corrupt acts and money laundering transaction in the health sector for the purchase and procurement and supply of medical equipment, medical supplies, medication into billions of dollars. In Mauritius, we are investigating, I think, 13 cases related to procurement during COVID in the health sector. So we are building, based on that experience, we are going to develop a major conference on procurement before the end of the year to try and bring the different partners involved in the procurement system and process, where the private sector is going to be a leading partner, to try and learn lessons from the COVID-19 and the different investigation that you've carried out, and how we can, based on that investigation, on those investigations, reinforce integrity into the procurement system. It's not going to address only procurement in the health system, but also generally, because procurement cuts across different sectors. And I mentioned earlier that we are beginning to adopt this approach in criminal investigation. If you're interested, recently the trend has been to try, even insofar as conducting criminal investigation is concerned, to build partnership with the private sector, especially the financial sector, in sharing financial information and intelligence. In the UK, there is a JMLIT, the Joint Money Laundering Intelligence Task Force, which has been replicated in South Africa and a few countries. We are going to be doing this, setting up this platform before the end of the year to try and, work together with the private sector in facilitating our investigation. And built into that, there is always a system that has come up recently that existed in the US for a long time, but in the UK it has started. It's called Deferred Prosecution Agreement, which is, that's a long stretch, which is a kind of conversation between the public and the private sector. I'll stop here.
Please, thank you. Thank you for all that information. You talked a lot on 3 slides, and that was excellent. Thank you so much. Moving to Chile and the Supreme Audit Institution. Jorge, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Gemma. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Well, I am very glad to be here, to be in person, and to be here in this very nice city. I told you yesterday that I have a little relation with Basel because 21 years ago I was here for learning German. So, which is very strange because the German here is quite different than the German in Germany, but it was a standard German. Well, in my introductory remarks, I want to cover 3 main topics. First of all, I want to respond or answer the question, what is a Supreme Audit Institution? The second one is regarding what is necessary for collective action. And in the third, I will showcase 2 examples from our point of view. So what is a Supreme Audit Institution? Maybe in all of your countries you have one. A Supreme Audit Institution normally is a kind of gray institution which is responsible for something which is not so sexy, which is the oversight of the investment of public resources, and they normally perform audits. This is also the case in Chile. This is a very well-known, at least in Chile, it's a very well-known institution. This is quite old for the Chilean history. It's almost 100 years old. And, well, of course, we are responsible also for these 2 main tasks. But if you think only in these 2 traditional tasks, both of them are related with prevention of corruption. But if we think and we take a look in the last year United Nations General Assembly regarding anti-corruption, and we see the political declaration, the paragraph number 5, we can see that the Supreme Audit Institutions play a role in the fight against corruption. And this is what we are doing, at least in the Chilean case, for the last at least 6 years, because I was heading this institution in the last 6 years. So we have a strategic plan, and we, in our plan, have oriented all our tasks, all our activities, all our job in pursuing and tackle the corruption. So when we perform, for instance, an audit, we are performing forensic audits in order to first of all, to see if the money is still public money and not yet private money. So this is the role of the Supreme Audit Institution, and I think if you want to see a Supreme Audit Institution today, we also have a role in the prevention or in the fight against corruption. What is necessary for collective action? From our point of view, collective action is maybe the only way to tackle corruption. If we want to fight against corruption, we have to work collectively, we have to cooperate, public sector, private sector, civil society, academia. Because if we take a look at the corrupt act, there are at least 2 parties. One party is the public sector, the execution of public power, of course, and the other part is private sector or the use of this power for private interests. So if we want to act collectively, we have to cooperate. This is the only way to achieve this goal to tackle corruption. So but to act collectively, we have to trust. And this is a big challenge in our region, I mean in Latin America. If you see this graphic, the interpersonal trust among societies in Latin America countries is very low, only 12%. People don't trust each other, and it's also the case in Chile. But even worse is the trust in government. Of course, this graphic shows you only the trust in government among the OECD countries in this report, the House Life. I think in Switzerland, people trust the most in their government. But if you see the case of Chile, in Chile is well known as a country, at least in Latin America, with strong institutions, with very low ranking or perception of corruption. We have also a very, very low trust in our government. In this context, in the context of the public sector, I am very proud to say that my institution, so the Contraloría, is a very trustworthy institution. In a poll 2 years ago, 85% of the people said that the Contraloría is responsible for fight against corruption. If you take a look in the Contraloría's Act, you can't find a word about corruption, but people think that this is responsibility of the Contraloría, which is a great, I think this represents a lot of confidence in our work, but also is a very big responsibility. In the second study among civil servants, 65% of the civil servants say that the most trustworthy institution is the Contraloría in our context. So with this support, we were acting also in collective action. Then I want to showcase two main examples which were led by the Contraloría. The first example is our anti-corruption alliance, which is, of course, an alliance among public sector, private sector, where our representatives from several branches of the private sector, the bank, the insurance companies, the construction companies, and also the civil society. And in this alliance, which is 10 years old, and is led by the Contraloría and also with the support of the United Nations Development Program, we perform a lot of activities. The alliance is split in 5 main working groups. One of them is promote integrity. The second one is legal standards, integrity standards, capacity building, and communication. We have a lot of information in the second floor, in the first floor about our anti-corruption alliance. And the second example is the National Anti-Corruption Strategy. Normally, an anti-corruption strategy is performed by governments. You have to know that the Contraloría in Chile is maybe the 4th or the 5th authority in the country. So it's the president, president of the Senate, president of the Supreme Court, and then comes the Comptroller. So, but we saw a passivity in the government in order to tackle corruption, in order to act not reactively, but in an active way to promote and to fight against corruption. So we took the opportunity and we were together during several months with the support of the UNODC, sorry, and we applied this methodology in order to develop this national strategy. There are 25 measures against corruption, which are very proactive, and these are split in 3 different pillars. The first one is anti-corruption, integrity and democracy. The second one is oversight public resources, and the third one is good governance. Well, the order maybe is changed, but well, more than 23,000 people participated in this, in the writing of this strategy, and I think this is key for the success of our anti-corruption strategy. Well, I think I will stop here, and then I will, of course, for questions.
Thank you so much, Jorge. It's fascinating and a very engaging model that you have there. So hopefully we'll come back to that in a moment. But for now, let's go to Izadora, a bit closer to home, the French anti-corruption agency. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. Good morning, everyone. First of all, let me also warmly thank the Basel Institute on Governance for the invitation and for organizing this very stimulating conference. I'm very happy to be here and very honored to share this panel with such prominent speakers. It's a pleasure. For my opening remarks, I would like to give you some background on anti-corruption in France and the role of the FA. And then I will briefly highlight 2 examples of meaningful engagement with the private sector. So on the background, In recent years, France has undertaken major reforms to improve its integrity system. These reforms culminate in the adoption of the law of 9 December 2016, known as the Sapin II law. Michel Sapin was the Minister of Economy at the time. This law draws inspiration from international best standards, while also including innovative provisions. In particular, it introduces mandatory compliance programs for large companies. That is to say, companies with at least 500 employees and a turnover of more than 100 million euros. These legal obligations are applicable both to the parent company and its subsidiaries in France or abroad. The reasoning behind the Sapin II law is already pretty much aligned with the concept of collective action, because the law, with its obligations, implies that the fight against corruption is not reserved to a few specialized law enforcement authorities, but that companies share this responsibility, that companies must proactively prevent corruption. And they are not expected to do this alone. The Sapin II law also created the French Anti-Corruption Agency, the FA, that I'm honored to represent here today. What is the FA? The FA is a nationwide service under the joint authority of the Minister of Economy, actually budget, they have to minister, but it's budget, and the Minister of Justice. Our core mission is to help public and private organizations to prevent and detect corruption in a broad sense. So many different infractions like influence peddling, embezzlement, bribery, etc. With this in view, the FA provides guidance and support to companies and audits the effectiveness of corporate compliance programs. The FA has the power to sanction companies for compliance failures. That's very original because it's a very preventive obligation, even if there is no corruption case going on. And according to the OECD Working Group on Bribery, and we will have the chair of the working group, Mr. Drago Kos, that will speak with us tomorrow. According to this group, that is a very important one, the FA and this new preventive approach have allowed France to regain credibility and visibility in the fight against corruption. This very successful outcome, well, that I think it's successful, and the working group on bribery, so it's a good outcome, was achieved through positive engagement with the private sector. And now I will mention two examples of such an engagement. First, we engage with the private sector for developing our official guidelines. The guidelines provide detailed explanation on how to comply with the Sapin II law, on how to design and implement an effective compliance program. They are based not only on the FA's experience and expertise as a regulator, but also on the feedback of multiple stakeholders from different sectors, civil society, private sector, etc. This feedback is gathered through a public consultation. Trade associations and consulting firms, among other stakeholders of the private sector, send comments and inputs to the agents that help us to enrich the guidelines, to make them more complete, because we had other perspectives, to make them more grounded in reality, because we have the feedback from the field, and at the end of the day, more useful for companies. And for us, having this dialogue with the private sector while shaping standards is crucial to facilitate ownership of these standards afterwards. The final product of these exchanges, the guidelines that were published, belongs to all of us. Indeed, it's a shared framework, And this is very valuable. Beside the guidelines, the FA publishes practical guides that cover a vast array of topics, such as due diligence for mergers and acquisitions, corporate policies on gifts and invitations, conflicts of interest, and so on. And here, too, we organize always public consultations and collect feedback from the private sector. Lately, this collaborative process has been further enhanced. So we are going beyond the public consultation, and for our most recent guides, like the one on anti-corruption in the construction industry, we have set up working groups with business federations in order to jointly discuss the good practices and challenges faced by companies, and together draft guides that are truly fit for purpose. So this is a very interesting experience of engagement that is valuable for both the private sector and government. Secondly, another example that I would like to share with you is that the FA conducts training and awareness-raising activities for and with companies to increase knowledge of integrity issues and disseminate the French anti-corruption standards. These activities provide valuable platforms for dialogue on operational matters. For instance, the FA has organized a training workshop with a federation of pharmaceutical companies. This workshop offered a great opportunity to discuss how to adapt the anti-corruption measures of the SAP-2 law to the specific and highly regulated context in which these companies operate. This kind of platform is mutually beneficial. And if I want really to highlight this term, it's mutually beneficial to have collective action. It's not something that's good only to the private sector or only for government. It's a win-win situation. Because it benefits companies that can make their voices heard, they can raise questions, bring attention to shortcomings and needs. And it's also beneficial for government, and specifically for the FA, as we can always enhance our action and build trust. And as Jorge said, trust is a key dimension here in the fight against corruption, because this trust and cooperation across sectors is key to find real solutions to our common problems, to pursue the same goal, which is to ensure a level playing field for business and to promote a culture of integrity that embraces the whole of society. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm very happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Izadora. Actually, I'm going to come back to you first with a question that I think will help to illuminate some of your many interesting points. So AFA creates guidelines in conjunction with business federations and companies. So how do you choose the topics for the guidelines, and how do you choose who you're going to consult with? Is it volunteers, or do you point the finger and say, I think you'd like to volunteer? How does that work? How is the collaboration and the trust developed?
Well, thank you very much for this question. The topics are chosen by the agency, and we have two ways of choosing them. One, through the discussions and exchanges that we have with the companies, through the feedback of the private sector. We also have, one of our initiatives is that we conduct a survey of the maturity of businesses' anti-corruption systems. And this survey is called the National Diagnostic. We conducted this once every 2 years. And the last time we gathered the inputs from more than 2,000 companies of various sectors and sizes. So we have this feedback from the companies through this questionnaire. And this is very important to us to have a more evidence-based decision-making. So we have discussions, the survey, and finally, the lessons learned through our audits. Because we can audit a very large panel of companies. We have large powers that are given to us by the law. And through these audits, we can see which measures are more challenging, where the failures are, and so we can try to provide guidelines to help amend the situation. So those are the three main sources. And how do we choose who to consult? Actually, and I think it's a good argument for collective action, we prefer to go to the business federations. We don't ask for particular volunteers. The public consultation is open to all. Anybody can participate, any company. It's on our website. But for the working groups and the more target consultation, we go to business federations, whether general. We have, for instance, a partnership with the Business Federation of SMEs in France, general or sectoral. And that's important for us because as governments, we don't want to favor one company over each other. So we prefer to have this collective vision of the industry. So we see which federations are active in a particular sector and we reach out to them.
Thank you. I guess that also helps with conflicts of interest and also absorbs the SME, the small and medium-sized enterprises as well into the dialogue. So thank you. Jorge, if I can turn to you, I think there's some questions from the audience about the consultative process you followed to get to your anti-corruption strategy with those impressive numbers there. But I'd also like to ask you about the strategy and collective action that is in the strategy that envisages a role for the private sector. What does that commitment look like? And how's that going to be implemented? So if you can perhaps wrap those three things in, that would be great, because time is a little bit of the essence. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question and for the question from the public. Well, more information we will share with you upstairs in the...
Right, there's the booths
yes,
that will be...
Yes, of course, I'm very happy to share with you all this information. There is also a web page with all the information and the measures and so on. Well, some of the measures are regarding the collective action. So some of them are regarding how we can work or how can we incentive the private sector to have better standards regarding ethics, of course, in businesses. Some of them are regarding the public procurement processes. So we have to modernize our system, which is 20 years old. And at the beginning, 20 years ago, was it was very on the top of the systems in the world, but now it's, of course, old, and we have to modernize these systems. And other measures are regarding the participation of public as well. For instance, we have to modernize our legislation in whistleblowing, which is very imperfect and very old also. So, yeah, the thing is that some of these measures are responsibility of the Contraloría, my institution, and we have a plan, an action plan to make reality these measures, but some of them depend on the government, and now we have a new government, and I hope that this government could take this, and I think they will do it because they are working in a new anti-corruption agenda, which will be more proactive than reactive. But other measures depends on legal changes. So, and this depends on the parliament. So the discussion is there. So, and we hope that at least we do our task. We have this strategy is available for everywhere, for everybody. So they and everywhere. So they can see what to do in this. They don't have to start from zero.
Thank you. So everybody should, who's interested in knowing more about your work, should consult upstairs with the booth when the time comes. Maybe just if you could just briefly tackle the question that's at the top there. Resistance or maybe criticism from other parts of government in fulfilling your anti-corruption role. As we know, government is complicated.
I forget to say that the Contraloría is an independent body. It's at a constitutional level, and we are not part of the government. So, and this position lasts for 8 years. This is my 7th year, so next year will be my last year. And from the very beginning, I said, even when I was in front of the parliament presenting my idea of Contraloría, I said I will fight against corruption. And corruption, at least in Spanish, is a very ugly word. And for the Chilean culture, 6 or 7 years ago, we didn't talk about corruption. So if you don't talk about corruption, maybe it doesn't exist. But it's not true, of course. Now, and from the very beginning, it was very hard, especially because if you for instance, if you want to control or oversight municipalities in Chile, which most of them are, of course, in some political sectors, it is very easy that the political parties say that you are acting politically and you are pursuing this color or not the other, and so on. But we were able to show that with our work and with objectivity, with new methods, by using the data analysis also, we can show that our work is objective. Of course, we can make mistakes, but it's objective and it's very well recognized. So at the beginning it was very hard, but now I think it's accepted more or less. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Navin, you've got a couple of questions there, but I can't see now. They've disappeared, or okay, maybe they.
How do you start the process of reaching out
Yes.
to religious bodies and other groups?
Yes.
And maybe you can also wrap into that and keep it as short as possible. You're coming up to the 10-year anniversary of the platform. How do you keep companies interested and engaged?
Well, first of all, I think there's a general recognition even within the industry that this is something useful and of interest to everybody. So once you have this recognition, it follows that people are more prepared to engage. So on the basis of that kind of recognition for the need and the interest to engage and to participate and work together, we keep organizing meetings of the platform on a regular basis. And there are about 25 members of both the public and the private sector on that platform, on the executive committee. It's chaired by the ICAC and the head of the Mauritius Business Enterprise, which is a private sector organization. We have regular meetings. We discuss common issues, that are of interest to both parties. And we address specific issues in the form of publication. There are a series of publications that have been made on, for example, licensing, procurement, and I think it's slow, but I think it continues because there is this general recognition. In the last 2 years, we have not been able to do too much because of COVID, obviously. But recently, we've started to relaunch the process and make sure that this moves forward. So I think, as I stated earlier, it's a process that keeps evolving and building, and you need to put in all the effort that is required. And I'm glad to say that both from the private sector and the public sector, you have representatives from different ministries, including the Prime Minister's office, and then the top Federation of Industries in the country. So that's a positive sign. On the other question of reaching out to the different sectors, I think the manner in which we do this is we start a conversation with the head of that particular group. If it is a religious body, we will go and meet the head of the executive committee and express our views and discuss common interest, especially if it is value-based, because both religious bodies and the ICAC mandate involves working on building integrity. In other words, re-engineering the value set into the system. And then we would invite them to as keynote speakers in different events, and then lay the foundation for ongoing partnership. In most cases, we developed MOUs within the different groupings and define a concrete plan of action annexed to that memorandum of understanding, and organize events over time with different groups. So this approach is applicable to the different sectors that I've mentioned in my earlier intervention. And if you look at the section of the law that I have presented earlier, you will see that, this is it kind of facilitates our task because it's already in the law that we have to be able to work together with those collective agencies. And there is something common in the sense that they recognize that the legislator had decided that this should be the approach and the strategy to be adopted, and they're prepared to work together. I just wanted to add something else. It's all important to put systems in place and build institutions, adopt legislation, and set up institutions. But I think at the end of the day, and this is an issue that's coming up recently in the anti-corruption regulatory and compliance framework, is effectiveness. Is a system effective? I think Professor Heffernan said it differently. She said, you make promises and you don't deliver, you will be considered a liar. It's the same reasoning. You set up institution, you adopt legislation, and you don't do anything about it. You're not achieving anything. So in the FATF, I've worked a lot on AML CFT in the FATF space, and we got a resolution adopted at the UNODC in 2019 on building effectiveness into the UN anti-corruption strategy, especially in the peer review mechanism, so that my own experience tells me that, if your system is not working and it's not working effectively, you're losing a big part of the whole game. And effectiveness entails different issues that's coming up, in recent time. What kind of impact are you having? You're doing a lot of educational work, you're building in a code of ethics and so on. So are you able to assess the impact? And if you're talking about impact, are you able to measure that impact? So this is the kind of conversation that's recent in the anti-corruption space. And I think there's a question on what are the new preventive approach. I think those are some of the areas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Navin. A last question for Izadora. Your approach, your agency's approach seems to have evolved over time. What advice would you give to other representatives of governments here from your experience, or to the private sector seeking to engage in collective action with the public sector?
Well, we are a very young agency.
Yes.
With a lot of experience, but recent experience. And I think one advice would be to try to think outside the box, try to change the roles, because our regular culture was to think about the regulator and the companies as something very distanced and not cooperating. And we're trying to innovate this approach. And I think this was very beneficial. Try to rethink our roles and see that even though we have different missions, different incentives, different prerogatives, we all, at the end of the day, want the same thing. And this would be one of my advice.
Thank you so much. I'm going to leave the discussion on that high note in terms of think out of the box, ask each other questions, and I invite you to visit the stand where Daniela and Jorge will be glad to share their experience and information. I think everybody's earned a coffee, but before that, I would ask you to thank the panel in the usual way.